Before we begin painting today, I want to review these observational skills that we need to be improving in this painting, but also the paintings that we're going to be creating afterwards. We want to make sure that we're still paying attention to the shapes, viewpoint, value range, and color within our scene. For your trees on the right and the grass on the left, it's very important to make sure that you're putting your values in the right spot to show the shapes of the tree. So here we have this tree canopy layered effect going on because the values are separating the different sections of the tree from one another. Same thing with the grass. We have darker grass that's being separated from the lighter grass to show how it's, being grown in chunks. So it's very important to have the value range difference. You also want to make sure that you're paying close attention to the correct color because this will help show the proper viewpoint that we have. To help these trees in the distance look like they are in the distance, we need to make sure that we have been mixing them to a lighter value and a less intense color. The trees in the foreground should be more intense and a darker color. You'll notice that the grasses on the left are the most intense greens that we have in our painting, and they have also the darkest greens down here, and that just helps pull that stuff forward in our composition. Because this is our first big, scene painting that we're doing. If things are not perfect, that's okay. Just try to make sure that you have some type of improvement before you finish this painting. For our first color today, we will be mixing the brighter green hue in our grasses on the left-hand side of the painting. Begin by combining light yellow and cyan blue to make a very intense green. Then add a little bit of Prussian blue to darken the color. Instead of using your rectangular brush, I would like you to use your angle brush to complete the grass in this section. Analyze where this color rests in your reference photo and then place it in accordingly. When I make my marks with this brush, the end of the longer bristles is facing down with the shortest bristles facing the direction on where I want my grasses to end. Press lightly with your brush so your grass lines are thin and not too thick. As I lightly draw in these hatching lines, I am varying the starting point of my lines as well as subtly changing the angle of each line only by a few degrees to add an extra sense of realism. And as you end making a mark, lift off the pressure of your brush to make sure you are getting a thinner line. And remember about what we talked about yesterday. The lines tend to tilt to the right as they come closer to the water. And you also want to pay attention to creating a nice full range of value. Leave spaces white to show the highlight. Don't paint over every little bit of green you put in yesterday because we want to have this nice three-dimensional range of value that we're seeing in our reference photo. Remix more of that same color with a combination of light yellow, cyan blue, and Prussian blue. But this time we're going to be adding it into the trees on the right-hand side. Notice how some of this more intense green can be found on that middle tree to the right. By placing this more intense color in a small section of our less intense trees will help create a smoother transition between each section of tree that we see here on the right hand side. And like yesterday, make sure you're creating those little color placement families. You're pressing hard to create the dad, slightly medium to create the mom, and 3 little tiny marks for the kids, angling your brush and changing the pressure to create varied marks. Our next color will be for the darker, cooler greens in our grasses on the left. Begin by mixing light yellow, cyan blue, and ultramarine blue. Using your angled brush again, paint in this darker hue in the sections where you see it in the reference photo. And as always, pay attention to the length and direction of the grass before you paint. Angle your angled brush in the direction the grass is growing and paint those marks in lightly, lifting the brush at the end of the mark to make a tapered line. After painting this section in, squint your eyes at your painting. When you squint your eyes, you blur out the detail and it just helps you look at the shapes and value of the colors that you've placed in. Does the value and color placement of this color match the value of the color in the reference photo? If it's too light, darken the hue with your blues and repaint. If it's too dark, quickly take a dry paper towel and blot the watercolor off the paper before it fully sets in. Then add more water or yellow to your color before you try painting it in again. We're going to use that same color again, but this time, in addition to the light yellow, cyan blue, and ultramarine, I want you to add in a touch of the crimson red. Take that color and place it into your intense tree on the right-hand side. Take your time paying attention to where this specific hue should be placed. Make sure you are following the contour of the tree to show its billowing canopy. So these darker values are going to be placed right next to the highlights because these are supposed to start showing the core shadows in the tree. Create those color families where you're making large, medium, and smaller size marks. Paint in some marks for the grass while also putting in some horizontal strokes on the surface of the water so we have a better reflection of this tree. Next, let's create the darker green we're seeing in the grasses on the left. We're going to add in more color to our original green mixture that we started with today. So if you've run out, recreate the mixture of light yellow, cyan blue, and Prussian blue in about equal proportions. Once you have that base, add in ultramarine and alizarin crimson until you've matched the dark blue-green in this area. The red is only meant to darken that hue and reduce its intensity, so you only need a little bit. Remember, complementary colors can be used to reduce a color's intensity and to help darken a hue. So since this is a dark green, that's why we added a little bit of that red in there to make it a little bit darker and a little bit more of a tone. And as you paint this in, use your angled brush. Pay attention to where this specific hue should go. And you'll notice I actually made a very small tint of this color to put in the grasses on the upper portion. And then I'm using the darker version of this to add in these darker values that I'm seeing to the right of the tree, as well as with the grasses that are right up against this side of the water. To help make your grass look more realistic, vary the length of your marks and the angle of your marks, as well as the starting point of your marks. You don't want to create the illusion of rows, so make sure that they're all starting at various placements. For this next part, this is where you get to be a little bit more expressive. You're creating more like dots and angled lines than you are straight hatching lines. And that's what gives it that really fun kind of sketching looking pattern that you're seeing right below that tree. Put those same bits and dots in the grasses to the right, and then darken your green again by adding in more ultramarine blue. This is going to help create a more muted tone that's more bluish green, and paint this more bluish green color into the grasses on the right hand side. If you've had to remix, that's okay. Just remix again with your light yellow, Prussian blue, cyan blue, your ultramarine blue, and then a little bit of red. And then the last step that I'd like you to do with this nice blue-green color is to add it in the reflections underneath the grasses on both the left and right side. When you put it in the right side, make sure you leave that little bit of space between the water and the grass to show that yellowish bank that separates the water from the land. And as you paint in these horizontal strokes, pay attention to the length of what they look like in the river. Dilute the pigment with some water to create more of a tint to put this color in to help, make your river look a little bit more solid. Now to deepen the grasses and the tree on the right, we're going to use this dark green mixture of light yellow, cyan blue, Prussian blue, and ultramarine, and with that touch of crimson red, but this time add in a little bit more ultramarine blue to really darken the mixture. Add this extra darkened green into the grass again. Once that grass is fully dry though, remember we're doing wet on dry, take this bluish green mixture, add it back into the grasses on the right, darken up the reflection on the water, and then we can take this same bluish green mixture and also add it to the trees on the right. Now if your mixture is a little bit too blue, you can always add in a little bit more light yellow to tilt it back towards being more of a green, but this darker green will help pull that really intense green tree on the right hand side forward in our composition, making our scene look way more three-dimensional. This is going to be the last step for today, so make sure that your values are correct before you finish and move on to the next step of the painting, which we'll learn about tomorrow.